We're going to use the no reading strategy to test out this passage, and luckily we have a very nice title at the beginning, How Birds Got Their Beaks. That's probably informative, giving us something about the main idea of the passage, but we're still going to skip any whole passage questions. And remember, I'm just doing this. I've never seen this test before, so if you need to stick around till the end to see the answers that I got wrong, because I might get some wrong. So let's take a look. All right, question 21, as predicted, is one of those whole passage questions, so we're going to have to wait on this. This is, let's see, is this a no line reference question? According to the passage, the ancient bird Archaeopteryx is significant to the evolution of beaks in birds because, based on the fossil record, the facial structure of Archaeopteryx, this is very specific. So this is something I think that, even though I don't have a line reference, probably is not about the entire passage because it's just a very specific fact that they're looking for. So it's probably somewhere in the first half of the passage. We can see that the next question is giving us line references in the 30s and the 40s, and so the answer to number 22 is probably before that. So let's see, right? We got a couple things we can scan for. Archaeopteryx, the beaks, and the facial structure. That seems the most important. Let's take a look. Agile beaks, okay, evolution, kind of skipping here, hummingbirds, they have seemingly turned back the evolutionary clock. Okay. Conclusions are at odds. Earlier studies. Okay. In ancestral reptiles, a pair of small bones makes up the tip of the snout. In today's birds, those premaxillary bones are long, narrow, and fused, producing the upper bill. The ancient bird Archaeopteryx reveals an intermediate step. Its premaxillary bones were not very expanded, but in later avian species, the bones are progressively more fused. Other works had also implicated the premaxillary bones in beak evolution. So this seems like the answer is here somehow. They're saying it's not expanded, not fused necessarily. So, all right, let's see. Let's see if this tells us anything. The facial structure of Archaeopteryx provides evidence of the existence of an evolutionary step between a snout and a beak. That seems to be exactly what they're saying. It possesses physical characteristics directly linking them to present-day alligators. It's not about alligators. Identifies them as one of the oldest birds to have had a beak. Well, it says it doesn't have a beak. It says it's an intermediate step. Reveals them to be one of the earliest birds to have fused facial bones. That's definitely a trap because what they're saying here is that the later avian species are progressively more fused. They're talking about the fusion here. Maybe there is some fusion, but yeah, no, that's not. They're not saying that Archaeopteryx has that. In fact, this is a good example of the +1 sentence rule. Just read beyond kind of the line reference that it seems like they're drawing you to. Even if they don't tell us, we can see from Archaeopteryx that that's where they want us to look. And it says, yeah, in today's birds, those premaxillary bones are long, narrow, and fused, producing the upper bill. The ancient bird Archaeopteryx reveals an intermediate step. Yeah. It's got to be A, provides evidence of the existence of an evolutionary step between a snout and a beak. Yeah. We're talking about snouts and beaks? Yes. Tip of the snout, beak. Yep, definitely. Okay. 23. What evidence in the passage best supports the hypothesis that the presence of WNT and whatever that is, proteins during embryonic development is necessary for the formation of beaks? So we have these proteins during the development are necessary for the formation of a beak. So 37 to 38 is right here. 37 to 38. So Buller's search for earlier studies of genetic pathways. Nope, that's just talking about the existence of studies. Does not say us anything about them. 46 to 48. Going to be over here. In mammals, lizards, birds, and alligators, in contrast, activity of the WNT gene is highest on the sides of the embryonic phase. Okay, so they're talking about that gene. They're not talking about the other gene, so that's not a great sign. In fact, you know what? I'm not going to reread. Let's just keep going. Let's just see if 49 to 51 gets us any closer. That is here, 49 to 51. To explore these genes, Roll Buller and what's his name treated bird embryos with inhibitors of that. So they treated them. Doesn't say that did anything. So 51 to 54, hopefully, is just going to now bring it home for us. When the two signals were curved, the premaxillary bones became round and never fused, as in birds' dinosaur relatives, instead of growing long and pointy. So that seems to be the result of the experiment, right? They're saying we need evidence that during the development they need these proteins for the formation of beaks. This is saying when we inhibited them, the two signals were curbed That's the curbing of the proteins, though they never fused, and so they're not growing long and pointed. They're not forming beaks. So that's definitely it. I don't think this is a particularly hard question. You just got to make sure that you understand it's not about repeating the names of the proteins. It's about the deeper ideas in the question. So always pay attention to the question. In line 52, curbed most nearly means, we just read this. Curbed means, it says here inhibitors, right? So it's inhibited means that it's, would be a good, held back is probably it. Held back, something like that. Evaded, suppressed, yep. If you suppress it, you kind of prevent it from being there. I get that this is a vocab question that actually has some difficult vocab, so this might be hard for people who don't have a strong English background. As used in lines 32, oh, we're jumping, right? So look at this, chronology rule, it's breaking. This happens sometimes. This whole test has had this. A lot of jumping back and forth, very strange, but it doesn't bother me for the no reading strategy. It just probably means we're going to reset in other places. So 32, step most nearly means. So step, that's going to be here. The ancient bird is an intermediate step, an intermediate stage, an intermediate, point, something like that, right? There's steps. Things are happening. Yeah, stage. Yeah, distance, no. There's no movement. There's no distance. Procedure, it's not like a surgery. So stage in this case doesn't mean a stage is in like the thing you perform a play on, right? A stage is like a step in a process, a stage in development. So even the word stage here is being used maybe in a very uncommon way, but yeah, this is definitely the answer. Okay, so now I don't know what to do. Where is this answer going to be? Is this going to be after 32? Is this going to be probably after 32, before 67? According to the passage, the earlier studies that Buller consulted were important primarily because. So again, the no reading strategy does not force me to only read the lines that I'm told. I can always read more. And when they break the chronology rule and do weird things to the passages, I have the full passage. I'm flexible. This is a case where they're very clearly referencing a specific thing. I can skim for that. So I think the answer to this is going to be somewhere between 32 and 67 or 77. But specifically, I'm looking for previous studies that Buller consulted. So I have an idea of what I'm looking for. If I find it, I'm sure I'm going to know. So let's go to 32 here. Buller searched for earlier studies. Hey, what do you know? It's not that hard, guys. If you don't read the passage, you can usually find what you're looking for very easily if you know what you're looking for. That's your problem. If you're having trouble with this strategy, is you usually are just reading for the sake of reading. You don't have a purpose. You don't have a goal in mind when you read. So why did he do this? Okay. He searched for earlier studies of genetic pathways that control development of these bones. Works in mice and chicken had implicated two sets of signals. A gene called this, active, okay. This other thing helps drive the proliferation of cells. Okay. It's highest on the sides. Okay, so basically the earlier studies told us that these are the genes that matter. So let's see. They were important because they confirm, that's a strong word, when beak formation in an embryonic bird typically begins. Well, I could try to turn this choice into a question. When does it begin? Did they talk about the time? It didn't seem to be the main point. I know I read it quickly, but let's see. It identified particular genes that could initiate beak formation in birds. Yeah, it seems like it's about the genes, right? What were the particular genes, right? Notice if I turn that into a question, there's an easy answer. What were the particular genes? The WNT and the FGF or whatever it was, right? So I have answers. That seems right. It proved, another strong word, confirmed, that beak formation in birds was a response to external conditions. What were the conditions? They don't say. It pinpointed the primary gene that activates the development of a bird's beak. Well, it wasn't one gene. It was multiple. Let me just go back and make sure. But I'm pretty sure that they're not getting that specific. They're looking for these studies. It's got two sets of signals. A gene called this became an active 3-day-old chicks. Later, just before bones form, this other gene drives the proliferation of cells where it promotes the expansion of the bones, and it's on the sides of the face. So yeah, not only do they say the answer to be, right, that it's identifying those particular genes, But it's not saying these other things, right? It doesn't say when it forms. In fact, it says the opposite. It says that one of the genes works in 3-day-old chicks, but the other one is later. So it's not a particular time. It's multiple times. It's all sorts of points in the development. And then D, the primary gene, this is just a matter of knowing the difference between 1 and 2, right? There's 2 things that they talk about. They're not saying one gene, they're saying multiple. So just count sometimes and you'll be able to get rid of it, some trap answers. Definitely be here. Okay. The passage shifts focus in the 8th paragraph from a consideration of Buller and what's-his-name's research to, 67 to 77. What's going on here? So I'll read a little bit before this to get the context. The study suggests that these things signal changes that allow the skulls of ancient birds to evolve in a whole new direction. Okay, forming a beak. Not everyone agrees. Oh, so it's probably offering an alternative opinion. Blah, blah, blah. Nathan Young, working with Schneider, carried extensive skull measurements on a variety of embryonic vertebrates and determined the point during development at which the bird face begins to diverge. Another gene was critical for forming the beak. Unlike this, it's active in the right place. So also worries that the changes in the facial structure may stem from unintended cell death. Okay, so basically they're just saying everything we've said before might not be true. Here's another set of studies or people to kind of question things. So it's a sketch of an experiment to confirm the research. Again, that word confirm. And no, how could it confirm it if it's saying that might not be true? It's a discussion of a possible challenge to that research. Yeah, that seems right. Defense of the ultimate usefulness. No, they don't say why it's useful. We're looking at like bird beaks. Why is this useful? It's not. Summary of a study disproving. Now, notice, if you were between B and D, right, they seem very similar. They both seem to be saying some version of we disagree, right? But if you're down to B and D, you've got to pick B here. It's so obvious just based on SAT rules and strategies and ideas that B is the better choice because it's so much weaker, right? Discussion of a possible challenge to that research. It's a possible challenge. They're challenging it. They're not disproving it, right? Disprove is super strong. If it is disproving it, then they need to say in the lines that there is no way for Buller and Nazbanov or whatever to have been right, that they are definitively wrong, that there is something wrong with their research, and we just don't get that. We just say some disagree. Not everyone agrees, right? This is a challenge, not disproval. And in general on these passages, it's very rare that words like disprove, words like confirm or prove are going to ever be in right answers because they're so strong, they're so definitive. In general, the SAT, you only have 100 lines for a science passage. You're not going to prove anything in those lines, usually. And even in science as a whole, as a field, you rarely prove stuff. You mostly get evidence supporting ideas. And so this idea of something being definitive and unquestionable, it's just rare in real life too. So it's very rare in the science passages in the SAT. All right, let's look at 28 and 29. Based on the passage, Mercutio's response to which of the following questions would most likely differ from Abzanov. I hate these names. Okay, so his response would differ. So these two people disagree on something. Let's see what that is. So do I need to get... Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully one of these line references in 29 is going to incorporate both people in some way. Let's see, 67. Yeah, not everyone agrees. Well, here, this guy is saying that they signal changes that allow skulls to evolve in a whole new direction. So honestly, these lines are probably important for just understanding the question. He's saying that those are the responsible genes. Not everyone agrees. Okay. Honestly, this is really tempting, but it feels like a trap to me because it's not really saying anything, right? It's just saying someone disagrees, but it's not saying who, it's not saying why. There's no question that I'm going to be able to pull out of that, right? So you got to say more. The number 28 is asking for something more specific, more detailed that they're going to be able to disagree on. So let's see if we can find something better. 67 to 72. That is here, 67. That's still basically the same area. So B, this is A. In 2014, UCSF's Nathan Young and Ralph Marcuccio, working with Schneider, carried out extensive skull measurements on a variety of embryonic vertebrates and determined the point during development at which the bird face begins to diverge from those of other vertebrates. So it's saying they studied the same thing, but it is not saying that they came to a different conclusion, right? It's, again, this is a little bit of a trap because it sounds like we're talking about the right people and in the right area, but it's not saying what they would disagree on. It's not getting specific with the why they disagree. So 72 to 76. Next little bit here. The work and later experiments supported a 2009 idea proposed by Marcuccio that the activity of another gene, SHH for sonic hedgehog, what? Anyway, was critical for forming the beak. So another gene. That's literally like a good reason, like another gene. Okay. It's probably the answer. Let's look at 78 to 81. That is here. Marcuccio, developmental biologist, also worries that the changes in facial structure observed by the Harvard team may stem from unintended cell death caused by the inhibitors they use. So that also could be right. In fact, you know what? That's sounding a lot more like it. This number, letter C, feels like a trap. So there's an unintended consequence to the experiment that the other guys performed. So let's see. Let's see what we get matches for. Could be either C or D at this point. Is there evidence that birds are related to alligators? No, they agree on that. That's the whole point. They're trying to figure out how the snout becomes a beak, but they understand that they're similar. How are bird beaks different from alligator snouts? Well, no, they're not. The whole point of this is that they're asking like what causes them to be different, not how they're different. What triggered the anatomical change from snouts to beaks? Yeah, okay. What gene is responsible? That could be it. When did the evolution of contemporary bird beaks begin? No, they're not asking about when. They're asking about how. So C seems to be the answer. What triggered the anatomical change? And I guess that is line C, 72 to 76, because Abzanov says that it's these genes. And Marcuccio is saying it's this other gene, the Sonic the Hedgehog gene. So what triggered the gene? What triggered this change? Is it this gene or this gene? They just disagree on the gene. Yeah, that feels right. I thought this was going to be a more complicated question. It turns out that I was overthinking traps. And I have evidence of everything, so I'm not really going to question it. Let's just move on. The last paragraph mainly functions too. Okay, that's the end of the passage. Excellent. Yeah, last paragraph is here. Marcuccio, a developmental biologist, also worries that the changes in the facial structure have the unintended cell death. Adding the fossil record to this work is really an important step, but I think they are just looking at the wrong pathway, he says. Abzanov and Buller counter that these things are often co-expressed and may work together. So it's kind of trying to resolve the conflict, right? Say that maybe both teams are right in some way. Offer an alternative interpretation of Abzanov and Buller's evidence as described in the passage. Is it really an alternative? I mean, maybe, because they're saying the alternative interpretation is that the experiment that they did is what caused the change, not the gene itself. So maybe. B, preview upcoming research. No. C, imply that the sponsors of the study might have influence. No, it's not about bias. Challenge the underlying intentions of the... No, it's not about their intentions. It's not saying that they were like bad people for doing the study. So it's A. Yeah, the alternative interpretation is that maybe the thing that the chemical that they used to perform the experiment somehow influenced the experiment. They just say that. Cool. We got to go do one more, right? We got to go back to, 21. Primary purpose. Well, let's look at that title again. What was the primary purpose? How birds got their beaks. Let's see if that's enough. Present research that validates earlier studies about the evolution of beaks in a particular species of bird. Okay, bunch of problems with this that even if I had never read the passage, I would have been suspicious of. So let's see. Is it about a particular species of bird? No, they're talking about birds in general here. So that's very specific, and usually that kind of thing is wrong. Then we have the word validates. Remember before I was talking about words like proof and confirm and disprove. Validates is in that same category. If you're validating it, you are proving it to be true. Now, they're referencing earlier studies. They're performing new studies. But throughout the passage, especially those last few questions we did, there seems to be disagreement about what's going on. So is it validated? I don't know. This seems pretty strong. I would not like that choice, even if I'd never read a word of this passage. Suggests that alligators were the ancestor of several species of birds. Here's a great example of just like, who's the main character of the passage? Is the main character the alligators? No, it's about birds and beaks the whole time. C, discuss a study that provides an explanation of how a bird's beak has evolved from an ancestral snout. My one hesitance here is that it felt like, just in my memory, that it was multiple studies, but I don't know, maybe this is right, because it does talk about birds' beaks and how they're evolving and all that stuff, so that might be right. D, critique the approach a research team used to study the development of beak formation in chicken embryos. Ooh. So, in a very dumb summary kind of way, this is a positive versus negative kind of choice, right? Are we providing an explanation of something? Is it very positive and forward-thinking? Or is it more of a critique and say maybe that there's a problem? Honestly, from memory, it can go either way, because we did have that critique at the end. Critique the approach a research team used. Yeah. Powerful approach. I'm just seeing here if there's anything at the beginning. We didn't read a lot in the beginning. Now researchers may have identified a gene. We're trying to explain this, pinning them down. This value of papers, their ability to blend paleontology. So maybe it is about one study, right? This one study, they've identified the genes, their conclusions, right? So it does sound like it's one study. Tinkering with genetic signals. Okay. They searched for earlier studies, so they talk about earlier studies. They looked at these conclusions from those earlier studies. Then they did their own study to explore these roles. Yeah, this to me, I'm going to go with C. I could be wrong. This is why you got to stay till the end and watch all the end here. But I'm going to do the answers in a second. But yeah, I'm going to pick C here because it doesn't seem like the whole passage is saying why the study is bad. Remember, we have one paragraph about that at the end. And so when we're talking about primary purpose, you got to think like, okay, there might be multiple things mentioned, but you have to weigh them and say like, okay, which one weighs more, which is heavier, because that's probably the main idea. And so this mostly seems to be about the study that they did. There is some criticism of that study, but discussion of a study can include criticism. So that part seems to check off. So let's see how I did. Yeah, I got everything right here. I am not surprised at all. This was a very easy passage in my mind. And this is the kind of thing where like, yeah, the first two passages in this test were kind of hard and had some quirkiness to them, but this is like textbook. This is very straightforward. Even with this weird spot where the chronology rule seems to be broken, like I was able to figure it out. The no reading strategy did not throw me off here. I just read using the 32 to 67 as the chronology. But there were no questions here that I was really unsure about. And so that's why you shouldn't worry if the first part of a reading section is a little harder. There might be, or there will be, easier passages to come. Everything here, very by the book, very easy in terms of strategies and strong words and chronology rules. Like this was a good passage to rack up some easy points.